Hi, this is Satyan Bharti, and we are here at the Spring One Platform Conference in DC, and today we have with us James. Can you tell us a bit about what do you do at Pivotal?
Yeah, I was one of the early members of the Cloud Foundry team from start in 2010, and I played a couple different roles, and I currently am our head of product strategy for the company. And I spend a lot of time with clients, and I work on big new initiatives. I think you want to talk about functions a little bit, and we also have a container service. So try to help get these new ideas rolling with clients and make sure they're successful.
And you have some strong opinions also about serverless. We'll get into that also.
I can tell you about my breakfast conversation with a client, yeah.
You mentioned functions, and that's good to hear because sometimes people say serverless, and a lot of people argue that there is a server in serverless. Yeah. So how do you define serverless or function as a service in the most technical possible way?
Yeah, I would say that serverless is more of a marketing term, and function starts to get at the real design of the architecture, if you think about it. Like if you think about event-based architectures, that actually means something. Like, hey, if you have an event-based system versus a traditional like transactional database system, I kind of understand how you've designed something. If you say something is serverless, I think you're from Amazon marketing. Like that's a marketing term, and I think it's a popular marketing term. I'm not saying we can't have them. But if you think about event-based systems, then you can start to think about function as a service as a way of scheduling and responding to those events. And that to me is a technical term that has meaning. So we talk about function as a service and what we do, and we have a project called RIF. And it's recursively named in a sense. It means RIF is for functions, R-I-F-F. So that's the term we use. I think serverless is in general the idea that here's an outcome I want, here's some code to run, just make that happen for me. And I think the entire PCF suite in that sense is serverless. Like we provide a Kubernetes dial tone and just don't worry about it. Like I just need Kubernetes, give it to me, don't tell me how. I just need an app to run, don't tell me how. Here's my function, run it, don't tell me how. I would say that's the bucket called serverless. If you talk to Google Cloud, they think that BigQuery is serverless for the same reason. Here's my query, just run it. I don't want to optimize how you're storing data or thinking about that. That's what kind of makes BigQuery serverless. So I think that's a pseudo marketing term and maybe has that use-based attribute of intent and outcome without having to structure the infrastructure.
Right.
Does that make any sense?
No, it does, because it's simplified, easy to understand,
yeah.
And the core point is that it's event-driven.
Yeah.
So it makes it clear.
Yeah, like if you imagine a world of serverless and you have no events to listen to. Exactly.
but if you look at from a different perspective, is serverless, because sometimes people say, I may be just exaggerating, but that it's a kind of evolution of computing.
Yeah.
But everything is not event driven. There are a lot of things that have nothing. So how do you see it? Is it's an evolution or adjacent technology that will continue to coexist with stateful applications as well? What?
Yeah, I think that for certain what you might call episodic data transformations. So once a day I need to turn on, or twice a day I need to run and then turn off. You can bundle both that event listening architecture with a container scheduling architecture. Like if you think about what sort of Lambda really brought together was an event scaffolding as well as a resource scheduling. It combined those two things. There's some implication of more asynchronous programming in all of this. And what I was saying to you before we got on camera is, I spent the morning having breakfast with a client, and they were like, we actually think reactive programming, which takes us to more of an asynchronous processing model within the JVM and Spring, is a better way to get efficiency than quote unquote functions. And the idea there is you're making all of the interactions at a code level much more asynchronous and therefore not co-scheduled. That's a better way of driving efficiency than turning the overall container on and off. Like if you can actually bin pack asynchronous calls within the JVM, I think that's much more powerful than just turning a container on and off, which is a pretty brute force thing. And just to give you an example, if you look at startup times, like classically even Lambda, people complain, it's a 5 millisecond or 50 millisecond startup time. That's because you're turning on this entire infrastructure to execute. So there's some really interesting things there, and I do think that the reactive programming model is in some ways bigger of a force in the overall market right now.
So what is the status of reactive programming right now as compared to quote unquote serverless?
Yeah, I guess I'd say like go Google reactive Spring, and it's a whole new mental model for programmers to get their head around. It's different than traditional request response, but if the idea that more things can be happening at once without order, without prior order, that's an important part of it. So just go check it out. Go Google Spring Reactive. It's a whole new paradigm for developers to learn. And the example I would give you, I've seen some people on Twitter, I know you're on Twitter with me as well. One developer had taken something that was running on Lambda and ported it to reactive Spring. And it was a lot cheaper. And the reason is that it was a fully saturated kind of API. So if you think about something that's fully saturated, constantly running, turning the container on and off as part of the function as a service doesn't buy you as much. Does that make some sense? Whereas a full VM running constantly, or a full container running constantly with the JVM on it, taking all of the calls that come in and out without turning on and off, was actually more efficient and cheaper. So I just think that there's no easy answer here. Like actually understanding when to use something that's highly episodic versus you're really looking for maximum efficiency. Reactive might give you maximum efficiency at full concentration, whereas function as a service might give you a little bit of atomicity of how you do deployment of a simple thing, and that scheduling that's more episodic. That's a lot of words, so it tells you there's some nuance in this market.
So which one, where is Pivotal, putting its weight on? Either the two or both babies, or they're both?
What my advice to CTOs, CIOs is don't tell your development teams the outcome before they do it. Be late binding. Right? Be late binding in your design. So allow your teams to have access to function as a service, application as a service, container as a service. Don't have a religion that it's one or the other. I think that's where you stop designing and you start just following a faith. And I think because there's technical nuance in how you execute here, what you need is a platform that allows that to be late binding. But the gap in the market that we saw was that people tended to come to market with one or the other and market that as the solution.
Right.
So PCF, with the 2.0 vision, we brought all three of those together on any cloud. We think that's the modern way of doing development, and the 4,000 so people here at Spring One have seemed to agree so far this week.
So many new buzzwords or technology, however you want to call it, are popping up. It also becomes a challenge for companies of big or small size to try everything out. So what is your advice to them? How should they dip their toe in everything without?
I think the thing that I believe in is a concept I call value line. Which is that for a programming task or a technical task, there exists an abstraction at which you are doing more for the business than you are for just rote infrastructure work. And you want to find the value line for your problem. If you're trying to run a Kafka cluster, which is something that we see a lot of clients doing and something that we think is a mainstream technology people should be adopting, doing that in a container as a service is the highest possible abstraction to do it. Like you can't take Kafka and put it on Lambda. That's my example of like when buzzwords don't always interoperate. You can certainly wire them together, but you're not going to run a cluster on a function as a service. And so container as a service is the right abstraction there. If you're doing reactive Spring, which is an incredibly powerful new way of doing high throughput APIs, you can do that in our application as a service. A Spring Boot app with a reactive programming model can probably take more throughput than almost any other selection or option out there. That can be the application service. And if you're doing something that turns a user on and they infrequently register, like, hey, once a week on Monday, users activate this service. Function as a service might be the perfect thing to do, right? Hey, every Monday at 11, this thing happens and then it's gone. Wire your event and your container scheduling together then. I think there's some just basic principles here. I think the problem is people get carried away in the buzzword and they think, let's container everything or function everything. But the wisdom of this CTO this morning at breakfast with me is I think if we port everything we have into pure functions, we're gonna have 400 functions, and who's debugging how they interact? I was like, yeah, that's what the whole Spring paradigm is there to help you do, is write complex applications. You don't have to give that all up.
Okay, so we have talked we have an overload of technology.
Oh, right.
So let's take a break from that and let's talk about, quickly that when you are not, on Twitter, telling everybody, what do you do in your free time?
I'm lucky enough to live in San Francisco, and I'll tell you what I do in my free time.
Maybe you tell your family that, oh, this is my work time, but it's free time, so it's fake time, actually.
My favorite thing to do in my infrequent free time is actually to walk the city, San Francisco, and listen to Software Engineering Daily. And I know this sounds like the nerdiest possible pastime, but I love San Francisco walks, and I really enjoy what Software Engineering Daily does. Once a day, they come out with a 1-hour interview, and they just let an expert in the field answer questions. And I just enjoy listening to the language they talk about things in. I listen to how they consider problems, what they focus on, and what they don't. So listening to that once a day, an hour of another expert in another field, it helps build a model. And I think this is one way you can fight against buzzwords, is just like always be enriching your model, always be building your model. So I'm thankful that podcast exists, and you mix that with the view of the Bay Bridge on a Saturday morning and a good coffee, it's a pretty good jam. So that's my favorite hobby. What's your?
No, right now we are talking about your hobby. So.
Also, I gotta give all the details up.
Yes. Next time when you sit to interview me, then we talk about that.
Okay.
So anyway, thanks a lot for your time today, and hopefully we'll see you again.
Great to be part of this.
Thank you.
Thank you.